There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac, and welcome to the 4th annual Besties and Worsties. Let's get started. A lot of my categories carry over year to year, and I always take out a few and add a few, as befits the reading year. I have all of the books that I'm going to talk about listed in the show notes, but they're in alphabetical order by author, not in the order in which I'm going to talk about them. Some of them are listed for good reasons, and others not so much. Let's get going. The first one is the best opening line or paragraph, and hands down, that goes to a book that I just finished on audio a couple days ago, Delta Wedding by Eudora Welty. And here is how that novel opens. Now, I cannot do this justice. Please, if you haven't experienced Delta Wedding, you must do it on audio, listening to it side by side with the marvelous novel. But the audiobook narrator is Sally Darling, and she is a darling in the audiobook narration department. But I will do my best. The nickname of the train was the Yellow Dog. Its real name was the Yazoo Delta. It was a mixed train. The day was the 10th of September, 1923, afternoon. Laura McCraven, who was 9 years old, was on her first journey alone. She was going up from Jackson to visit her mother's people, the Fairchilds, at their plantation named Shellmound, at Fairchilds, Mississippi. When she got there, poor Laura, little motherless girl, they would all run out and say, for her mother had died in the winter, and they had not seen Laura since the funeral. Her father had come as far as Yazoo City with her, and put her on the dog. Her cousin, Dabney Fairchild, who was 17, was going to be married, but Laura could not be in the wedding for the reason that her mother was dead. Of these facts, the one most persistent in Laura's mind was the most intimate one, that her age was 9. The next award is for the sexiest writing or scene. This award goes for not sexy writing, I should probably change the name of it. It's for the most affecting, moving, revealing passage about sexuality. That goes to Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jadrowski. I have a full review of this. I will put a link in the show notes. And this is a scene. It's about a page long, a little bit longer than a page. Not all of these awards involve heavy-duty reading, but the first few do, of when the protagonist, a gay Polish guy in 1980s Warsaw, is remembering the budding of his precocious gayness when he was maybe 12 or something, and he's at some kind of a camp, and he's got a crush on one of the other boys, Maniac. On the last night of our stay, the supervisors organized a dance for us, a celebration of our upcoming ceremony. The center's canteen was turned into a sort of disco. There was sugary fruit compote and salt sticks, and music played from a radio. At first we were all shy, feeling pushed into adulthood. Boys stood on one side of the room in shorts and knee-high socks, and girls on the other with their skirts and white blouses. After one boy was asked to dance with his sister, we all started to move on the dance floor, some in couples, others in groups, swaying and jumping, excited by the drink and the music and the realization that all this was really for us. Maniac and I were dancing in a loose group with the boys from our room when, without warning, the lights went off. Night had already fallen outside, and now it rushed into the room. The girls shrieked, and the music continued. I felt elated, suddenly high on the possibilities of the dark, and some unknown barrier receded in my mind. I could see Beniac's outline near me, and the need to kiss him crept out of the night like a wolf. It was the first time I had consciously wanted to pull anyone towards me. The desire reached me like a distinct message from deep within, a place I had never sensed before, but recognized immediately. I moved towards him in a trance. His body showed no resistance when I pulled it against mine and embraced him, feeling the hardness of his bones, my face against his, and the warmth of his breath. This is when the lights turned back on. We looked at each other with eyes full of fright, aware of the people standing around us, looking at us. We pulled apart, and though we continued to dance, I no longer heard the music. I was transported into a vision of my life that made me so dizzy my head began to spin. Shame, heavy and alive, had materialized, built from buried fears and desires. And the award for Unsexiest writing or scene goes to the 1895 novel from Germany, Effie Briest by Theodore Fontaine, which I bailed on right after this scene. So this is, it doesn't matter what it's about. It's a really boring, badly written, badly translated. I'm not sure. Now that I've said it might be badly translated, let's mention the translator's name. Translated from the German by Mike Mitchell. These characters were just so intellectual, wooden, they didn't have bodies, and here is a scene between the protagonist, 17-year-old Effie, and her new husband. They've been married for like 10 minutes, 10 days maybe. Just listen to how stilted the language is, not only the dialogue between them, but the expository prose. I mean, I think I literally bailed on this page. So, page 52. This is going to be fun. Such had been the way the conversation had gone, after they'd talked about the elections, Nobeling's attempt on the emperor's life, and the price of oilseed rape, and now Innstetten and Effie were back home chatting for half an hour. The two housemaids were already in bed, for it was close on midnight. Innstetten, in a smoking jacket and Morocco leather slippers, was walking up and down. Effie was still in her formal attire, fan and gloves beside her. "Yes," Innstetten said, coming to a halt. "I think this is a day we really ought to celebrate, though how I couldn't say. Should I play you a victory march, or set the shark out there swinging, or carry you across the hall in triumph? Something ought to happen, for, as I'm sure you're aware, that was our last visit." "It was, thank God," Effie said, "but the feeling that we shall have some peace and quiet from now on is, I think, celebration enough. You could give me a kiss, though, but that never occurs to you. Not a single caress on all that long way. You just sat there, cold as a snowman, puffing away on your cigar. That's enough of that. I'll mend my ways soon enough. What I want to know at the moment is what you think about the whole question of the people with whom we should mix." And it goes from there. Somebody needs a hot shower. And the award for Best Cover goes to a novel that I read this year. I've interviewed the author on my channel, and I really enjoyed this novel. I'm giving it an award for the Best Cover, The Tainted by Koveri Matovan, a 2020 release set in colonial India in about 1920, about an Irish regiment there. I absolutely love this cover illustration. It is by James Nunn. It's fabulous. The novel, too, is fabulous. The next award is for a book I wish to hell I'd bailed on. There was a lot of contenders for that, but I have chosen one of the ones that I had the misfortune to judge for the BookTube Prize this year, and that was Tracy Chevalier's A Single Thread. It's just one of the worst books published in 2019. I read quite a few 2019 books, and this one takes the cake. It had a promising opening, and then it just read like the crappiest commercial fiction that you can imagine. I felt like Ms. Chevalier was phoning it in. There wasn't a single thread of it that held my interest. Wish the hell I hadn't bothered. Next is favorite character, and that goes to Gary Fagan's novel, The Student, for its protagonist, who she was my favorite character at the halfway mark in 2020, and she still is. Miriam Moscovich, who is a Jewish-Canadian university student at the University of Toronto in about 1960, if memory serves, and I just loved her. She was a little bit quiet, studious, and her inner life was rich, and I just connected with her and still carry her around inside. This is a novel that you can barely purchase outside Canada. If I ever have a chance to throw my influence around in the Canadian publishing scene, I think it's time to put away childish things, and books published in Canada should be available for purchase anywhere in the world, for God's sakes. This is a wonderful novel, and the main character, Miriam, was an absolute delight. I really related to her, and she came of age in Toronto at the same time that my birth mother, long story, but my birth mother was a student at the University of Toronto, so I think I had a special attachment to her because of that. Miriam. And so now let's move on to the award for the most hated character. This is the tie, two brothers in a novel that I seem to be the only reader in the world that hated it, or at least hated it for this particular reason. I could not stand the two brothers. I think one is the narrator and his brother. Oh, I didn't say the novel. And that goes to the novel, the Irish novel, The Wild Laughter by Cowlin Hughes. Well, it seems to be a very popular novel for many a reader, and I don't care about any of those opinions. I could not stand the two brothers at the heart of the novel, Hart and Cormac Black. There is a scene, and I rant about it in my Friday Reads. I will do a précis of that rant here. They are on double dates. They're young Irish men in like the 1990s or something. They're on double dates and they go back to one of the brothers' houses and they're both having sex with their dates. I don't think they know the women that they're with very well. And I don't have any moral judgment about anything so far in this little incident. But the one guy starts getting really violent and kind of non-consensually S&M with his woman, and she starts screaming, and she's friends with the other woman. So the other woman comes to her defense and gets her into a cab home, and then goes back to her man and kind of shakes her finger at the guy that was too rough. I don't know which brother was which. It doesn't matter. But then she also got turned on by seeing the other brother naked or something, so they end up hooking up the next day and they get together, like they're together for a while. They stayed together at least until I bailed. I mean, am I being moralistic? It just enraged me that I was being forced to experience that through the perspective of the man who is just like, fuck, men are assholes. So, yeah, my most hated character, or characters. I don't know which was the guy that was the asshole now, but one of my most favorite awards every year for the Besties and Worsties is the Puke-worthiest paragraph. And this is actually going to be a little bit longer than a paragraph, but this is from the very popular novel from the UK. I don't know if it was published this year or last, The Offing by Benjamin Myers, but I bailed, I think, on this page, which was page 5. The writing was just horrific. Now, not everything in this short passage that I'm going to read to you is terrible, but I think you will agree with me, if you have any literary taste whatsoever, that most of it is just trash. The houses sat haphazardly above the ebbing tide on a crumbling cliff face of loose soil and wet clay that was slowly being eroded by the salt spray and circling fret. The homes resembled stranded sailors, shipwrecked by the storms of centuries. Time itself was chipping away at this coastal reach, sculpting the island anew in an age of uncertainty. I thought about how the sea served to remind of the finite existence of solid matter, and that the only true boundaries are not trenches and shelters and checkpoints, but those between rock and sea and sky. Here I stopped to refill my flask from a roadside spring that fed into a stone trough, feeling as if I had wandered into a painting. The sun was a brilliant bright disk of shimmering white over a scumbled scape, and I understood, perhaps for the first time, what it was that made men wish to pick up a paintbrush or compose a verse. An impulse to capture the pulse-quickening sensation, this nowness, evoked by a vista as breathtaking as it was unexpected. Art was an attempt to preserve the amber of the moment. Like I say, I loved a scumbled scape and a few other phrases, but there was just a lot of Hallmark card bullshit prose in there. And the award for the best conclusion to a novel goes to Shuggy Bay by Douglas Stewart. Let me read it to you. It's not a spoilery conclusion. It's beautiful. And again, I can't do justice to the Scottish accent or anything like that. It's not a spoiler to say that this is a conversation between the protagonist, Shuggy Bay, and I think he's about 15 years old at this time, and I won't say what's just happened in his life or anything, but by the end of the story, this is his new girlfriend, and by girlfriend I mean he's basically out as a young gay man, and she's his friend, Leanne. But they haven't really talked much about anything, and that's how the novel ends. I think it's just a beautiful way to end a really beautiful novel. Leanne wiped her eyes. She turned out the empty pockets on her denims and held them out like flapping flags. How's about we just walk around for a wee while, eh? Geez, who's predictable now? Me? She laughed for what felt like the first time in a long while. No way! We both know you just want to go gawp at the big handsomes up the Virginia Arcade. He felt the flare of shame. He shook his head as if to deny it, but something in her eyes stopped him then. He drew a sharp breath between his front teeth. Leanne reached out and jabbed him sharply in the ribs. Pack it in. Asides, I think the one ginger lad with the pierced ears might have been making eyes at yous. Really? She grinned. Maybe. Mind you, he does have that one gammy eye, so who the fuck knows? Leanne swung the bag with her mother's dirty underclothes and pretended to launch it deep into the Clyde. Then she slipped her free arm into his and tried to shake him loose of his worry. He nudged into her shoulder like a tugboat until they were both turned away from the river. Shuggy dropped their rubbish into a council bin. You know, hearing about your Callum did make me wish we could go up the dancin' one time. Leanne was still swinging the dirty bag, and now she howled with laughter. It was so loud, so vibrant, it made the videocassette Jakies jump with fright. Ha! You? Get the fuck with those Ponzi school shoes, she squealed. There is no way Shuggy Bane can dance. Shuggy tutted. He wrenched himself from her side and ran a few paces ahead. He nodded all gallus and spun just the once on his polished heels. I'm gonna cry. I mean, it means more when you've read the first 478 pages, but it's just a beautiful way to conclude a novel that was very near and dear to my heart this year. And another personal favorite of Shawn the Book Maniac's Besties and Worsties is My Most Extreme Bale, and this year the award goes to this Norwegian novel, The Looking Glass Sisters by Gorl Gabrielsen, translated from the Norwegian by John Irons. And the extremity of this particular bale is that I have now bailed on this novel twice, once 2 or 3 years ago, and again I gave it a try. It's the first time I've ever tried a bail again, and I bailed 10 or 20 pages before my bailing point the first time. So I am done with this book, and I'm not sure I'll try another handful of bails to see if any of them strike me differently upon a retry, but this one gave me perhaps too much confidence that I am always right. And this is a new award this year because I'm reading more and more short stories, and so I have an award for the favorite short story, and it's actually really paradoxical in that this was not a short story that was in any of the books of short stories that I read, anthologies or otherwise. It was a short story that I read because the guys at Codex Cantina are always doing their fabulous analyses of short stories on their channel, and I decided, based on a video that I saw in my feed, that their latest one was on the Virginia Woolf short story, The Mark on the Wall, and so I found it and read it, and it's one of the best short stories I've ever read, and it's certainly the best short story I read in 2020. I loved it so much that I have now bought a collection of her short fiction, because I don't know that I'd ever read a Virginia Woolf short story. This one is very experimental, and I think I liked it quite a bit better than either of the guys at Codex Cantina, so that's fine. I'm never going to forget it. It's a short story that I'm going to be reading and rereading ad infinitum, and I may end up deciding that Virginia Woolf was more of a short story writer than she was a novelist. Oh my. But that short story is exquisite. Have you read it? The next award is also new for 2020, and that is, I haven't quite come up with a catchy way to name the award, but it's for the book that's aging the best, which is that when I read it, I liked it, but it's actually rising in my esteem the more distance I have from it. It's one of the best books I've read this year, and I love it now far more than I did when I finished it. I didn't dislike it when I finished it, but I just think it's a marvelous novel, and I have even more respect for it with maybe 4 or 5 months of retrospective admiration than I did when I finished it. So that is The Radetzky March by Joseph Roth, translated from the German by Michael Hoffman. And this is just a stunning novel, and it is just sitting really well with me. It's set in the 19th century three generations of a family. I'm not going to describe it because I don't want this video to go too long. But this, out of all the other books that I read in 2020, is the one that is just moving up, up, up. And here, for its second award, there should be an award for a book that gets more than one award, shouldn't there? And this is new in 2021 because I find as I get older and wiser that setting is becoming more important to me than it was even a few years ago. So I am giving an award for the most vivid setting, where when I think of this book, I think more about its setting than almost anything else, and I can still kind of step into the setting. I'm not usually attuned to setting, so a book that makes me remember the setting is a special kind of book indeed. So for its second award in 2020, Covery Madiban's The Tainted. She does such a fabulous job of painting a multi-dimensional picture of colonial India in the spring of 1920 with this Irish regiment and the biracial Anglo-Indians and the wildlife and the nature. It's just fabulous. It's a gorgeous novel, and one of the things that I love the most is its setting. Next is The Most Surprising Bale, and there were a lot of contenders for this as well, but I have chosen I have chosen the novel by Ellie Williams, The Liar's Dictionary, which I couldn't finish and thought was just twee and stupid, whereas I absolutely loved her debut collection of short stories, A Trib. I gave away my copy, and I think there's quite a few readers out there that liked it a lot better than I did. I mean, I didn't like it. I just thought it was, just ridiculous and not serious enough to hold my attention, and I couldn't get the humor. There was a lot of potential, but there is brainy whimsicality, and then there is brainy whimsicality that's overdone. And this one didn't pass the muster, so I was surprised at how little I liked The Liar's Dictionary, and I'm telling you the truth! Next is the most moving passage or scene, and I'm not going to read anything to you, but I am going to talk about two novellas I read. One is this Canadian novella by Joey Comeau, Malagash, published 2017. Oh, I love this novel so much. It is set in fairly modern times, Nova Scotia. The family live in the States, maybe, but the father, he's like 40, is dying of cancer, and they move back to his hometown so that he can be with his mom and brothers and stuff. And it's told through the eyes of his teenage daughter, Sunday. Her name is Sunday. And she, Sunday, is writing a computer virus to commemorate her father. That sounds absolutely daft, and it just works. I don't think it probably works for every reader, but it worked so potently for me, where she is secretly taping her father on his deathbed. I mean, it's told in such a humorous vein, and all of his jokes, his dad jokes and different conversations, and she's embedding the surreptitious recordings of him into a computer virus that she wants to send out into the universe to keep her father alive. That's either going to work for you or it's not, and I'm just talking about it, and there's just so many powerful scenes. And this collection of linked short stories, The Gifts of the Body by Rebecca Brown. I have a long, complicated history with this book, but the short version is, it was on my radar. I had a copy, never read it, and then I heard Greg of Supposedly Fun rave about it and got another copy, read it, and it just ripped my heart out. It is about a woman who is a caretaker for people with AIDS during the height of the AIDS epidemic. Is it set in San Francisco? The setting was so immaterial to the story. It was either set in San Francisco or New York, but some American city, and mostly gay men were just dying in legions. And this woman, the protagonist, is trying to take care of them as best she can. And it is told in such a dispassionate way that I was actually angry at Greg for how many emotions he made me feel. I love this book so much. Beg, borrow, or steal it. Okay, this one is... I'm almost uncomfortable to share it, but I have to. It's the kind of thing. So the award is the most surprising scene. And I have chosen a scene that is quite amusing in a very politically incorrect context that I just have to talk about. It comes from this work of Western Canadian history, Loyal Till Death, Indians in the Northwest Rebellion by Blair Stonechild. an Indigenous historian, and Bill Weiser, a settler historian, which I read for Nonfiction November. I thought the book itself was rather dry, but there's this one anecdote in it, so let me set it up. The rebellion in what became Saskatchewan in 1885 was a defining turn of events in Western Canadian history, in fact, where the Métis people under the leadership of Louis Riel and a few actual Indian tribes revolted against the colonial Canadian government. It was quickly put down, and then there were trials, and quite a few Métis and Indians, including the leader, Louis Riel, were executed. And this anecdote, which just is completely inappropriately humorous, is about an Indian chief. His name was One Arrow, and he was a Willow Cree chief. There are no photographs that survive of him, and he was one of the first to be put on trial, and thankfully for his sake, he was not executed. But his connection to the rebellion was basically fictionalized by the colonial authorities. He had been forced by some of the Métis people to support them, but he did not do so willingly, and he was actually wanting to stay loyal to quote-unquote Canada. He went to trial, and he served a couple years in jail and died almost immediately after getting out. The trials were show trials and created a lot of bad blood between the Indigenous peoples that we colonized and us awful colonizers. So in that context, I just bust a gut reading this passage. This is about One Arrow's trial. The first major Indian trial was that of One Arrow, the Willow Cree chief who had been forced to go to Batoche after the declaration of Riel's provisional government. Beverly Robertson, an experienced Winnipeg lawyer who had been hired by the Crown Council in mid-July, handled his defense. Robertson had to juggle his new duties with a busy private practice and did not arrive in Regina until a few days before One Arrow's August 13th trial. Things started badly. The elderly chief found the proceedings thoroughly confusing, even more so when the treason felony indictment was translated as knocking off the Queen's bonnet and stabbing her in the behind with the sword. There was no Cree equivalent for words such as conspiracy, traitor, or rebellion. "Are you drunk?" a perplexed One Arrow reportedly asked the court interpreter. Oh, dear. Next is the award for the Goofiest, bestest quote of the year, and that one is a tie. I could not choose between these two. The first is from Irmgard Coin's Gilgi, One of Us, translated from the German by Jeff Wilkes. Very short and to the point. "Stop it! Enough with the lyricism. It doesn't go with the pimple on your chin." And the other comes from Barbara Pym's novel Crampton Hodnett. "Is he thinking about me?" she whispered to the night, solemnly blowing kisses in what she imagined was the direction of Randolph College, but which was actually, and most unsuitably, the nearest way to a seminary for Roman Catholic priests. Next is the book I am most likely to reread the soonest. This was easy because I'm actually planning to reread this in 2021. Justine by Lawrence Durrell, the first book in the Alexandria Quartet. This was a buddy read with Adam of Memento Mori, and we couldn't have chosen the worst time to do this buddy read. It was like March of 2020. It was when the pandemic was just overtaking everybody and everybody's psyche, and I had so much trouble focusing, and we considered just abandoning the buddy read, but we persevered, and I could see what a wonderful novel it was, and I really, really enjoyed it, but I know that I missed a lot. So Adam and I are going to move on to the second novel in the quartet, which is, I always forget the name of it. I want to say Bartholomew. Whatever the second, it's not Bartholomew, it's something like that. Here's the cover. Before we buddy read that, I am going to reread this to just kind of sink into it that much more deeply with much more equanimity. Next is The Bale I am most likely to try again, and that goes to Evanfield by Rachel Ferguson. I read another novel by her a couple of years ago. The Brontes Went to Woolworths. I absolutely loved it, and this was a buddy read with Leah, my buddy reader extraordinary from Calgary, and I just couldn't. There was a density to the anecdotes that I just couldn't get into, and it was just kind of, I didn't hate it, but I just knew the book was coming at the wrong time. I think at the right time I would actually love it. So I will definitely be trying Evanfield again. Next is the award for the most surprising 5-star read. I have talked about this ad nauseum, so I will just in passing say it goes hands down to Sally Rooney's Normal People, a lushly literary novel that a lot of people hate for reasons that just completely elude me. It's wonderful. She's an amazing writer. It was a really powerful novel, and I didn't think I would like it because a lot of people didn't like it, and I don't know why, but it's fantastic. Hopefully Adam stopped watching before we got to that one. Next is for a popular 2020 book that I didn't hate, but I didn't see what all the fuss was about, and there was only one obvious choice, and that was Winter in Sokcho by Elisa Shua Dusupin, translated from, I think she wrote this in French. I think so. Translated by Anissa Abbas Higgins, and I didn't dislike it, but I just thought it was meh. I see that it's on a lot of other fabulous readers' top 10 lists, but I thought it was quite mediocre. Next is the most disappointing read of 2020. I'm not limiting this to 2020 releases, and that goes to the final Barbara Pym novel, An Academic Question. It was the last in her oeuvre to be published, and I really disliked it. I thought it was completely subpar and agree with some of her friends who were also literary critics that thought that it shouldn't have been published. It was just bad. And I don't think this is going to come as a big surprise. My favorite read that was published in 2020, hands down, goes to Shaggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. It won the Booker, unfortunately, because now I made a silly, asinine commitment that if it won the Booker, I would read the Booker 2021 long list. So here goes nothing, but it is a gorgeous novel that lives inside me. Next is the auspicious award of my worst read of a book published in 2020, and this one is also a book that really disappointed me and shocked me that I didn't like it at all, and that was The Death of Vivek Oji by Akweke Emeze, because Freshwater was my top review of whatever year it came out, a couple of years ago, and this I thought was awful. It didn't start out awful, but it just petered out in a way that once I realized what the book was supposed to be about, which didn't actually get revealed until 20 pages before the end, I thought it was a ripoff and it made me angry. So I'm going to keep it because Freshwater was such an amazing read and I'm expecting big things from Akweke Emeze, but if I said this was nothing special, it would be putting it extremely mildly. A new one this year is The Best Sunday Sentence, and those of you that don't know, I used to do Sunday sentences on my channel, and then I moved it over onto Twitter and Instagram, so if you don't follow me there, you don't know what I'm talking about, but the best one sentence I read in all of 2020 is from Tomasz Jadrowski's Swimming in the Dark. It was the sort of early summer that erases any memory of other seasons, one where light and warmth clasp and feed you to the absolute. And this is the counterpart for my new award about the book that's kind of aging really well. And that is the book that's faded away the most in my memory, the one that I remember the least about, that I didn't dislike or hate, but I now, in retrospect, remember very little about. And that goes to The Muscle Feast by Birgit van der Beek, translated, I believe, from the German by J.B. Bullock. And all I remember about it was that it was a dysfunctional family. The father wasn't coming home and they were cooking mussels. And I'm not sure there was much more to it than that. And the best title goes to Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun. What a fabulous title. The subtitle gives you more information. Portraits of Everyday Life in 8 Indigenous Communities by Paul Cisaquasis. And I just love the title. But much more than that, I absolutely love the book. That title, people. Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun. And finally, new in 2020, in an attempt to kind of conform to what the traditional year-end wrap-ups do, I'm going to give you my top 5 fiction. You know my number 1 is Shaggy Bane. And so, without spending any time on descriptions or mini reviews, here are the other 4. So, Number 2 is my second most favorite work of fiction for 2020, Delta Wedding by Eudora Welty. It was a reread, and I loved it so much more 25 years after I studied it in grad school. It's a book that just opens the veins of many members of a humongous white family in the deep south of America in the 1920s in a way that gets all the way inside family dynamics and the struggle for individuality and how easily we become distracted by our own selfish foibles when there's so much social justice all around us. Coming in at number 3 is The Long View by Elizabeth Howard. This 1956 novel by a novelist that I had never heard of, but is now one of my favorite 20th century British novelists. On the basis of this novel, The Long View was such an incisive and compelling account of a marriage told in reverse order. I didn't like the characters, but I understood the characters in a way that few writers can make me understand. The heart of a marriage that's having a lot of heart trouble. Just gorgeous. Coming in at number 3, The Student by Carrie Fagan. I have talked about this book. And coming in at number 5, the only short story collection on the top 5 list, A Fanatic Heart by Edna O'Brien. One of the most stunning short story collections I have ever read. It made me fall in love with Edna O'Brien and the way that she breaks out of the cage of Irish femininity in each and every story. Just incredible. That's it. Looking forward to Besties and Worsties of 2021. Thanks for watching.